The bishop stood in my workshop on a Tuesday in March and told me, in the gentle voice he used for funerals, that the whole district had agreed to say nothing, and that I would agree too. I was 74 years old. I had made harness in that shop for 51 years, and I had never once raised my voice to a minister. But I set down the awl in my hand, and I looked at him, and I said no. That one word cost me almost everything I had. It also saved a girl's life. I want to tell you how, because I have carried this for a long time, and a thing carried too long starts to rot the man who carries it. My name is Amos Stoltzfus. I live near a place we call Crooked Creek, in the green hills where the buggies still wear out the same roads they wore out 100 years ago. We are a quiet people. We are taught from the cradle that the loudest thing a man can do is be still and let God sort it out. For most of my life, I believed that the way I believed in rain and frost and the smell of leather. I believed silence was a kind of holiness. I do not believe that anymore. There is a silence that is prayer, and there is a silence that is a lid pressed down over something that is screaming, and I have learned, late and hard, to tell them apart. It started with a girl named Sadie. She was 16. She was the daughter of my neighbor Ben Mast, whose land touched mine on the south side where the creek bends. I had watched Sadie grow up the way you watch the corn grow, without thinking much about it, until one summer she is suddenly tall, and you can't remember her being small. She was a good girl, quick with her hands, quiet, a little shy, the kind who would carry a covered dish to a sick family before her mother even asked. I made her a small leather satchel for her 13th birthday, tooled with a running vine, and she used it every day after, worn soft and dark at the strap. I tell you that so you understand she was real. Not a story. A real girl, with a satchel, who lived 400 yards from my door. If you stay with me to the end of this, I think you'll understand why I have never told it whole until now. There is a part still ahead of you that I waited 50 years of church-going to be brave enough to say out loud. Sadie went to work that spring at the home of Deacon Yost. Now, I have to tell you about Yost, because he is the shadow over the whole of this. Deacon Aaron Yost was the brother of our bishop, John Yost. The two of them ran our district the way two hands run a plow, and people did not cross either one. Aaron Yost was a big man, heavy through the shoulders, with a beard gone iron gray and a way of looking at you that made you check your own conscience for sins you hadn't gotten around to committing yet. He was respected. He prayed long and loud at the preaching. His farm was the neatest in the district, the fences tight, the stock fat. And in the back room of that neat farm, behind the tight fences, he was not a man of God at all. He was something else. Sadie's mother had passed 2 winters before, of the cancer, quick and cruel, and Ben Mast was raising 5 children alone and doing the best a grieving man can do, which is to say, not well. When Aaron Yost's wife asked for a girl to help with the canning and the wash and the little ones, it was an honor. The deacon's house. Good pay, or what passed for pay among us, which was mostly the standing of being trusted. Ben sent Sadie gladly. I remember him telling me at the feed store that it was a blessing, the Lord providing. I nodded. I had no reason then to think anything but the same. The first I knew that something was wrong was a small thing. The way the first I know a harness is failing is one stitch pulled loose. Sadie came to my shop in October, on an errand to fetch a mended bridle for her father, and she would not look at me. That was all. She had always looked at me, said "Good morning, Amos" in her clear voice, asked after my wife Mary, gone home. That day she kept her eyes on the floor, took the bridle, and went out without a word. And I saw, when she turned, that the side of her face near the ear was a yellow-green color, the color a bruise turns when it is 2 weeks old and healing. I told myself she had been kicked by a cow. We all get kicked by cows. I told myself that, and I went back to my work, and may God forgive me for how easy it was to believe. To understand why I believed it, you have to understand how we are made. We are taught not to see, not cruelly. It is meant as kindness. You do not pry into another family's house. You do not carry tales. You assume the best, because assuming the best is the same as love, we are told, and a man who goes looking for sin in his neighbor usually finds it first in himself. For 74 years, that teaching had made me a peaceable man. That October, It made me a blind one. I want to be honest about that. I was not innocent of Sadie's bruise. I was only ignorant, and I had chosen my ignorance the way you choose to keep your coat buttoned against the cold. It went on through the winter. I see now, looking back, all the signs I stepped over like stones in a creek. Sadie thin where she had been strong. Sadie flinching when Aaron Yost's name came up at the table. Sadie at the Sunday preaching sitting on the women's side, and her eyes finding the door over and over, as if she were measuring the distance to it. There was a Sunday in February when she fainted on the bench, just folded over quiet, and the women carried her out, and the men went on with the sermon as if a bird had merely flown against the window. Bishop John Yost preached that morning on the duty of children to honor those set over them. I have wondered since whether he knew. I have wondered a great deal whether he knew the whole time, and chose the church's good name over the girl, and called it faith. I think he did. God will weigh that. It is not mine to weigh, though I confess I have set my thumb on the scale more than once in the dark. The thing broke open on a night in early March, the cold kind of March we get in those hills, where the mud freezes hard at dusk and your breath hangs white in the lamplight. There was a pounding on my door near midnight. Mary woke before I did and gripped my arm. I went down in my nightshirt with the lamp, and when I opened the door, there was Sadie massed on my porch. No bonnet, no shawl, in just her dress, shaking so hard I could hear her teeth. Her lip was split. There was blood dried black under her nose, and her left arm she held against her body, the way you hold a thing that is broken. Because it was broken, I would learn, in 2 places below the elbow. She had run. Across the frozen fields in the dark, 2 miles, from the Yost farm to my door. Because mine was the door with a light still in the window. And because, she told me later, she remembered the man who made her satchel. That is the whole of why she came to me. A leather bag with a vine on it, given to a 13-year-old. You never know which of your small kindnesses is the rope somebody grabs going over the edge. I am not going to tell you everything Sadie told me that night, sitting at my kitchen table with Mary's quilt around her, and Mary holding warm milk to her split lip with hands that did not shake, even though mine did. Some of it is hers to tell or not tell, forever, and she has earned that right 100 times over. I will tell you only this much, because you needed to understand what came after. Deacon Aaron Yost had been hurting that girl since the summer, hurting her in the way a coward hurts someone smaller and trapped and told by everyone she has ever known to obey. When she had finally said no, said it out loud and tried to leave, he had broken her arm to teach her the cost of no. And his wife had stood in the doorway and watched and said nothing, because in that house, as in too many houses, silence was the rule that kept the roof on. I sat at my own table and I felt something in me go very still. Not loud, still. The way the woods go still right before the worst of a storm. I drove her in my buggy before dawn to the only place I knew to go, which was the home of a man named Caleb Harlan. Caleb had been born Amish, 2 districts over, and had left the church as a young man, jumped the fence, we say, and gone English and become a kind of doctor, a physician's assistant, they call it, working at a clinic in the county seat. The old folks did not speak his name. He was under the ban, shunned, a warning we held up to our children. But I knew, the way you know things in a small country, that Caleb Harlan had quietly set more Amish bones and stitched more Amish cuts than any English doctor for 40 miles. Because he spoke our dialect and asked no questions and charged what a person could pay, which was often nothing. When you are in real trouble in our world, you do not go to the people who are respected. You go to the people who are kind. They are very rarely the same people, and that is one of the saddest things I know. Caleb opened his door at 5 in the morning and looked at Sadie, and he did not say what happened. He said, "Come in, child. Have you eaten?" And he warmed her broth and set her arm and wrote everything down. That is the part that mattered later more than any of us knew at the time. Caleb Harlan, the shunned man, the man my own church told me to treat as dead, took out a clinic form and wrote down the date, and the breaks in the bone, and the old healed bruising, and the marks that told a man who had seen such things before exactly what kind of thing this was. He made me sign as the one who brought her. He signed it himself. He put it in a folder and he said, "Amos, you keep your half of this, and I will keep mine. A day may come when paper is the only thing standing between that man and another girl." I did not fully understand him then. I understood him completely later. I took Sadie home to her father at full daylight, and here is where I learned what we truly were. Because Ben Mast, her own father, when he had heard it, when he had wept and held his daughter's good hand, did the thing he had been raised to do. He went to the bishop. That is what we do. A wrong is not a matter for the law, for the English courts, for the sheriff. A wrong is a church matter, to be handled inside, quietly, by the ministers, so the world outside never sees and the name of the people is never shamed. Ben went to Bishop John Yost, brother of the man who broke his daughter's arm, and he laid the thing at the bishop's feet, and he trusted that justice would come down from above like rain. It did not rain. The bishop came to my shop 2 days later, on that Tuesday in March I told you about at the start, and he stood among my hanging traces and bridles with his hat in his hands and his funeral voice on, and he told me the matter had been weighed and prayed over and settled. Aaron, he said, his brother, had confessed his sin to the ministers and made his peace with God, and would sit a time in low standing, and it was finished, forgiven. And now, he said, the district must protect itself. There would be talk if this got out. The English papers loved nothing better than to make beasts of plain people. The young people would be shamed in the eyes of other districts. Marriages would be harder to make. The good name built up over 100 years would be spent in a single season of gossip. And so he said the whole district had agreed, and Ben Mast had agreed, weeping but agreed, that no one would speak of it again. Not to outsiders, not among themselves. It would be as if it had never been. The girl would be moved to relatives in Indiana to start fresh. And I, Amos Stoltzfus, who knew, who had her blood on the collar of my coat still, would agree as well. If you have come this far into Sadie's story, I am asking you to stay, because what I did next is the reason I am an old man telling you this instead of an old man who took it to his grave. Hit that little bell if you are the kind of person who would have refused too. I need to know there are some of us left. I asked him one question. I asked, and the next girl? Because there is always a next girl. A man does not break a child's arm once and become gentle. The bishop looked at me, and for just a moment, the funeral voice slipped, and I saw underneath it something cold and tired and certain of its own rightness. And he said, Aaron has repented. It is not your place to doubt God's forgiveness, Amos. It is your place to be silent. The district has decided. And then he said the thing that was meant to end it, the thing that ends most things among us. He said, do not make us bring the ban against you. The ban, the shunning, to be cut off, to have my own church members forbidden to eat at my table, to take anything from my hand, to do business with me. My harness shop lived on the trade of plain people for 200 miles. The ban would not just shame me, it would starve me. Mary and I were old. We had no children living near, our 2 sons gone to a settlement out west years before. The church was our whole world, our help in sickness, our company in age, our burial ground. He was telling me that if I spoke, they would take all of it, and he watched my face while he told me, the way Aaron Yost had watched Sadie's face, and I understood for the first time in my life that the 2 brothers were not so different. One used his fists, one used the church. Both of them used silence, and both of them were sure that God was on their side. I set down my awl. I said no. I think I surprised us both. I want to be honest about the days after, because if I tell you I was brave and unafraid, I will be lying, and I have done with lying. I was afraid every hour. The ban came down on me within the month. It was done properly, by the book, with 2 warnings and then the vote. And on a Sunday in April, the bishop read my name before the whole congregation, and the thing was sealed. My neighbors of 50 years turned their faces from me. At the feed store, men I had known since we were boys took their change from the counter and not from my hand. My oldest friend, Eli Bontrager, with whom I had raised 4 barns and buried 2 wives between us, passed me on the road and looked straight ahead as though I were fog. Mary lost her quilting circle. The women who had sat in our kitchen 1,000 times stopped coming, and some of them cried doing it, and that was almost worse than if they had been cruel. We were alone, in a way I did not know a person could be alone while still living among people. And the orders kept coming. The harness trade dried up to nothing inside of 6 weeks. A man cannot make a living when half the county is forbidden to buy from him, and the other half follows the first half out of fear. We ate from our garden and the few hens we had, and the little money I had saved in a coffee tin under the floor of the shop. I am not too proud to tell you we got thin that summer. Two old people getting thin in a house gone quiet as a tomb because one of them would not agree that a broken girl was a thing the world should never hear about. There were nights I came close to going to the bishop and saying I had been wrong. Take it back, let me back in. I would lie in the dark and do the arithmetic of an old man's fear, the cost of the no. And it would seem like madness, like I had thrown away a whole good life on a point of pride. And then I would hear, in the other room, a sound. Because Sadie did not go to Indiana. She had begged her father, and her father, ashamed at last of his own surrender, had let her come to us instead, to the shunned house, the one place in the district where she was safe because we had already lost everything there was to lose. She slept in our spare room, with her arm in the splint Caleb had made, and some nights she had bad dreams and she would cry out, a small sound, the sound of a girl trying to be quiet even in her sleep, even in terror, because she had been taught her whole life that the worst sin was to make a noise. I would lie there and hear it, and the arithmetic would stop mattering. You cannot put a number against that sound. I have tried. It does not divide. So I did the only thing a stubborn old man knows how to do. I kept on, and I started, quietly, to write things down. It was Caleb Harlan who put the idea in my head, though he did it sideways, the way he did everything. He came to our house at night, twice a month, under the dark, to check Sadie's arm where it was knitting, because no English doctor in the open could be told, and no Amish one would touch it. And one night, sitting at my table where Sadie had first sat, he said, Amos, they're counting on time. That's their whole plan. Let it get old. Let people forget. In a year, nobody will say his name, and the girl will be grown and gone, and Aaron Yost will be a deacon again, full standing, passing the bread at communion. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. The only thing time can't rot is a written record with a date on it. You write down everything you saw, every date, dress it plain, just facts. You and me both. And we hold it, not to ruin anybody, to make sure that if there is a next girl, there is also a paper that says, this was not the first time. And these men knew, and they chose to hide it. So I bought a child's composition notebook at the dry goods store, the kind with the black and white marbled cover, 50 cents. And in the evenings by the lamp, I wrote in my plain, careful hand everything I could remember and everything that came new. The date Sadie came to my shop and would not look at me, and the color of the bruise. The Sunday she fainted, the night she pounded on my door, and the breaks in her arm and what she told me. Only the facts of it, gently set down. The morning I drove her to Caleb, the day the bishop came and told me to be silent, and his exact words, do not make us bring the ban against you. Because exact words are a kind of fingerprint, and I knew it. I wrote down the date the ban was read. I wrote down the names of every family forbidden to trade with me, because that too was a fact. And facts laid in a row start to tell a truth that no single one of them tells alone. Caleb kept the clinic record and made me a copy in his own hand. We did not show them to anyone, we just held them. Like two men holding a door shut against a wind we could feel building on the other side. The wind came in the fall. It came the way I had known in my stilled heart it would come, because Aaron Yost had not repented. Repentance changes a man, and he was not changed. He was only careful for a while, and a careful, cruel man is still a cruel man waiting. In October, almost a year to the day after Sadie first would not meet my eye, a girl named Ruth Troyer, 14 years old, who had gone to help in the Yost house after Sadie left, was found by her mother in the barn with marks on her that a mother knows. And this time the family did not even go to the bishop. They had heard the way people hear, the way the truth seeps under the floorboards of even the quietest house, that going to the bishop was going to the brother. They came, in the dark, to the shunned house, to me, because by then I had become, without meaning to, the one address in the district where a frightened person could go and not be sent back to be silent. I sat with the Troyers at my table, the third frightened family to sit there, and I felt the stillness come over me again. Only this time it was not the stillness before the storm. It was the stillness of a man who has finally been handed the thing he has been waiting a year for, and hates that he was right, and knows what he has to do. I went to my shop. I took the coffee tin from under the floor, and beside it, wrapped in oilcloth, the marbled notebook, a year thick now with dates. And I went to find Caleb Harlan, and I said, "It's time. There's a next girl, just like you said." And Caleb, who had been shunned his whole adult life and had no good name left to lose, and had been waiting longer than I had, just nodded and said, "Then we do it right. We don't hand it to a newspaper. We hand it to the people who can stop him, and we let the truth be loud enough that they can't put the lid back down." What we did was not loud the way the world is loud. We were still plain people, even me, even shunned. We did not run to the English papers, though Caleb knew reporters who would have spread it across 3 counties by morning. That was not justice. That was only noise, and noise would have hurt Sadie and Ruth more than it hurt Aaron Yost. Instead, we did 2 things, and we did them in the same week so that no lid could come down fast enough. The first thing, Caleb took the clinic records, his and the copy of mine, 2 girls now, dates and injuries laid plain, and he took them to the county. Not in anger, in duty. He sat in an office with a woman whose job it was to protect children, and he laid the papers on her desk, and he told her in the flat, careful voice of a man who had decided that 2 minors had been assaulted, that there was medical documentation, and that the community had moved to conceal it. He was a mandated reporter, it turned out, by his work. He had been one for years. He told me later that the hardest thing he ever did was sit in that office, because every bone in him, bred Amish, screamed that he was betraying his people to the English. And then he thought of the sound Sadie made in her sleep, the same sound I had heard, because he had heard it too on his night visits. And he signed his name. The second thing was mine, and it was the one that took everything I had left. I called for a meeting, not of our district, because our district's ministers were the very men who had pressed the lid down. I sent word, by the only people who would still carry word for me, which were the shunned and the half-trusted and old Caleb, to the bishops and ministers of the 3 nearest districts, the wider church, the men who stood above even John Yost. I told them an old man under the Bann asked them to come and hear a thing, and that if they would not come, the county already had the papers, and the matter would be settled by the English law without the church's hand in it at all, to the church's everlasting shame. That last part was the only threat I have ever made in my life. It was Caleb's idea to add it. He said, "They'll move for their good name when they won't move for a girl. Use the name. It's the only key that fits that lock." God forgive us both. He was right. They came. On a cold, clear morning in November, in a barn lent to us by the only family brave enough or shunned enough to lend it, 11 ministers from 4 districts sat on backless benches, and I stood before them, an old harness maker, banned, thin, my hands shaking. Not from fear anymore, from something that sat deeper than fear and had been sitting there a year. And I opened the marbled notebook, and I read it to them. Every date, the bruise, the color of healing in October, the faint in February, the night of the broken arm, the bishop in my shop, his hat in his hands, his exact words, the ban. And then the new page, Ruth Troyer, 14, found by her mother, the same barn, the same man. After that man had been told he was forgiven, and the whole district had been told to be silent, so that this could happen again in the dark, while everyone looked away. I did not raise my voice. I have heard that the loudest thing a man can do is be still. That is the one piece of what I was taught that turned out to be true, only not in the way they meant it. The barn was so quiet, I could hear the horses shifting in the far stalls. And when I finished, I closed the notebook, and I said the only sermon I have ever preached. I said, "You taught me that silence is holy. You were wrong, and I was a coward to believe you. There is a silence that is just a hand over a child's mouth. I will not put my hand there. Do what you will to me. I am already cast out. But that man is not God's deacon. He is a danger you have hidden behind the church's good name, and if you hide him one more day, the shame will not be that the English found out. The shame will be that we made them find out, because we would not." And I sat down because my legs would no longer hold me. And old Caleb, shunned 40 years, put his hand on my shoulder in front of all of them. And not one of those 11 ministers told him to take it off. I will not pretend the church moved like lightning. It does not. But the lid was off, and 11 men from outside the district had heard it with their own ears, and the county had the papers, and there was no putting any of it back. Within the week, the wider church suspended both Yost brothers, Aaron from the deaconship and John from the bishop's seat, pending a reckoning. Within the month, the English law did its slow, heavy work, and Aaron Yost was arrested at his neat farm, behind his tight fences, on a charge of what he had done to 2 girls. And there were not 11 ministers, but a whole county that heard about it then. He did not go back to that farm. He is, as I write this, in a state prison 3 hours' drive away, and he will be an old man before he is free, older than I am now. Bishop John Yost was harder, because what he did was not a crime the English have a clean word for. He never raised a hand. He only raised a wall, and walls are not against the law. But the wider church saw him plain at last. They took the bishop's seat from him for good. He was not banned the way I was, but he was set down, made a plain member again, no voice in the council. And the district was given a new bishop from outside, a young man named David Hirschberger with a soft voice and hard, honest eyes, who did the first thing a just man does. He lifted the ban from me. He came to my shop himself to do it. November had turned to December, and the first real snow was down. He stood among my dusty bridles, the trade a year dead around us, and he took off his hat the way the other one had, but everything else about him was different. He said the ban against me had been unjust, that it had been used as a weapon to protect a sinner and silence a witness, and that the church had sinned against me in laying it. And he asked me, a young bishop to an old banned man, to forgive the church. I am not too proud to tell you I wept. 50 years of being a peaceable, quiet man, and the first time the church bent its neck to me was the day after I finally refused to obey it. There is a lesson in that I am still turning over. The harness trade came back, slow, the way trade does. My neighbors of 50 years came back too, slower, and that was harder than the trade. Eli Bontrager, who had passed me on the road like fog, came to my door in January with his hat in his hands and could not get the first word out, and stood there working his jaw, and I just opened the door wider and said, "Get in out of the cold, you old fool. The coffee's on." And that was all either of us could manage, and it was enough. Mary's quilting circle came back to our kitchen. Some of the women would not look at me at first, the ones who had cried while they shunned us, because the shame of having done it sat on them now the way the bruise had sat on Sadie, a thing that heals slow and yellow-green. I did not hold it against them. They had been taught the same thing I had been taught. We were all of us raised to be silent. The wonder is not that so many stayed silent. The wonder is that, in the end, a few of us could not. Now, I have to tell you about the part I waited 50 years of church-going to be brave enough to say, the part I promised you near the start. It is the hardest part, and it is not about Aaron Yost or his brother or the Bann. It is about me. When I was a young man, 16, the same age Sadie was, there was a thing that happened in my own boyhood district, 200 miles and 60 years from here. A man, respected, a minister even, and a boy, smaller, trapped. I was not that boy, but I knew that boy. He was my friend, and he told me once the way Sadie came to my door, and I was 16 and afraid and full of everything I had been taught. And I told him to be silent. God help me, I told my own friend the very thing the bishop told me. Keep it quiet, don't shame the church, it'll be handled. And it was handled the way these things are handled, which is to say it was buried. And my friend grew up crooked around the wound of it, and drank, and died young 2 states away. And I went to his funeral and stood at the back, and have never in 50 years said one word about why. That is why I refused, not because I was brave, because I had already once been the bishop in my own small way, a frightened boy pressing the lid down on another frightened boy. And I had spent 50 years watching what it grew into. When the bishop stood in my shop and asked me to do it again, he did not know he was asking an old man who had already paid for that silence every day for half a century. I set down the awl. I said no. And what I was really saying no to was 16-year-old Amos and the friend I failed, and the funeral I stood at the back of. Some debts you cannot pay to the one you owe them to. He was 60 years in the ground. The only way I could pay it was to a girl named Sadie, pounding on my door in the cold, who happened to grab the rope of a small kindness on her way over the edge. Sadie is 22 now. She lives in Indiana, after all. But she went on her own terms, years later, to marry a gentle man named Aaron, which made us both laugh and cry the day she told me that she would take that name back from the man who had ruined it and give it to a good one. She writes us letters. Her arm healed straight. Caleb said it well. She has a baby girl of her own now, and she named her Mary, after my wife, who did not live to see it. Mary passed 2 springs ago, in her sleep, in our quiet house, with her hand in mine. The last thing she said to me, near the end, was that she was glad I had said no, that she would not have wanted to be married, at the finish, to a man who said yes. I think about that more than I think about anything. Ruth Troyer is well, too. She is older now, and last I heard she is training, of all things, to be a nurse, English schooling and all, with the wider church's blessing. Because the wider church learned something in that barn that November and has not unlearned it yet. There are new rules now in our districts about reporting harm to a child, rules that did not exist when Sadie first would not look at me. They are written down, with dates. An old harness maker had a small hand in that, they tell me, though I never asked for the credit and do not want it. Caleb Harlan died last winter. 81 years old, shunned his whole adult life by the church, he saved more children for than any man I ever knew. The new bishop, David Hirschberger, came to his funeral, which an Amish bishop is not supposed to do for a banned man, and stood at the front, not the back. And that is the only funeral I have ever been to where I left feeling that something had finally been set right instead of merely closed. I keep the marbled notebook still, in the oilcloth, under the floor of my shop where the coffee tin used to be. I do not open it anymore. I do not need to. I know every date in it the way I know the stitches in my own hands. People ask me, the few who know the whole of it, whether I would do it again, knowing the cost. The ban, the hunger, the year of being fogged to my oldest friends, the loneliness that aged Mary faster than the years should have. And I tell them the truth, which is that the cost was not the hard part. The hard part was the 50 years before, when I paid a different cost, a quieter one, in a coin I did not even know I was spending. The coin of a small dead voice I had hushed when I was 16. The band took my trade and my standing and a year of my peace. The silence, the first silence, the one everybody praised me for, had been taking something from me every single day for half a century. And I never felt the hand in my pocket until a girl pounded on my door and I finally turned around and looked. So if you are out there and you know a thing that someone has told you to keep quiet, and they have told you it is holy to keep it quiet, and the keeping of it is starting to rot something in you that you cannot name, I am an old man, and I have been on both sides of that door. And I will tell you the one thing I know for certain, after 74 years and one broken ban, there is a silence that is prayer, and there is a silence that is just a lid pressed down over a child who is screaming. Learn to tell them apart. It is the whole of the law and the prophets, near enough, and it cost me everything I had to learn it, and it was the cheapest thing I ever bought. The bishop ordered everyone to stay silent. I refused. And a girl named Sadie has a daughter named Mary who will grow up in a world with one fewer lid pressed down over her. And that, in the end, is the only sermon I have left to preach. Thank you for staying to the end of it. Some debts are paid in dollars. This one was paid in silence broken, and it was the best money I ever spent.